Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, the founder and the president of the World Values Network, often known as America's Rabbi, a prominent rabbi, author, TV host, and public speaker, and the author now of, I think, the 20th anniversary of the seminal book that most of us were introduced to him from, but also just being able to have a column that he writes that appears in many Jewish newspapers across the country, including the Allgemeiner and many other places like the Jerusalem Post. So without further ado, I welcome Rabbi Boteach, and then immediately after his remarks, he will be joining a panel which is moderated by Brooke Goldstein, the founder and CEO of the Lawfare Project, and will be joined by Stuart Force, the father of American veteran and unfortunately having fallen to terrorism in Israel, Taylor Force, and also he has started the Force Foundation, and also Sari Singer, the founder and CEO of Strength to Strength, a terrorism victim support organization, and also herself having been in a Hamas suicide bombing some 15, 16 years ago, and she's made it her life's work to really speak out on behalf of the needs for terror victims, to hold the perpetrators accountable, and also to deal with the trauma and the accountability that has to be had for those perpetrators. So without further ado, Rabbi Boteach.
Ladies and gentlemen, no doubt you heard the story about the man who gets a call from his doctor who says, test results are in, there's bad news and worse news. The man sits down, he says, what's the bad news? And the doctor says, you have 24 hours left to live. And the man says, what could possibly be worse than that? And the doctor says, I've been trying to call you since yesterday. So I have bad news and I have worse news. The bad news is that you have to listen to me for 10 minutes. I'm told I'm being given 10 minutes. The worst news is that it is a Jewish 10 minutes. We may be here all week. I'm here for two reasons. Firstly, out of deference and respect to my dear friend Daniel Pipes, and then out of deep deference and respect to my friend Stuart Force, who's going to be on the panel with me. Last year, our organization, the World Values Network, gave the Elie Wiesel Award to Stuart Force, who received it with his wife on behalf of his son posthumously, Taylor Force, the great American hero, West Point graduate, Afghanistan veteran, who was murdered, survived all that and was murdered by a Palestinian terrorist in Tel Aviv. But Daniel and I were at the Alhambra together on the Iberian Peninsula in Granada, Spain a few years back, and Daniel's an expert in Islamic culture, Arab culture, the Arabic language, and he was explaining everything to me. And it reminded me, Daniel, of the golden era when there was true peace and harmony between the Arab peoples and the Jewish community, between the Israel nation and the Muslim nation. And it is possible to have that harmony. It is possible for Jews to show gratitude and love and warmth to the Arab nation and the Islamic religion for taking us in when we were expelled from that Iberian Peninsula in 1492, largely taken in by the Ottomans, by one of the largest Islamic empires of all time. Friendship and love that has existed in the past between us. And we have to all try and forge that peace and harmony between two great world religions. But it cannot happen if any Arab or Islamic organization calls for a genocide of the Jewish people. And Hamas and Iran are at the top of that list, calling for the annihilation of my people. And if any Jew were to speak that way of Muslims, I would call that Jew an abomination to his or her faith. I would do my utmost to repudiate the credibility of that representative of the Jewish faith. So when Israel fought Hamas in yet another war in the summer of 2014, I took my family in the closing days of the war, and we went to Tel HaShomer Hospital. And I visited the Israeli veterans who now, the ones who survived, 67 soldiers died. I visited the soldiers with no arms and no legs, and we brought them sunglasses and perfume. Sunglasses as a present to the soldiers, and perfume not for their wives and not for their girlfriends. They were 18 years old. For their mothers who were sleeping on cots near their beds. These were boys. And they fought this war because Hamas is dedicated to the extermination and annihilation of my people. What did the Jewish people do to Hamas? That they would threaten the death of every Jew on planet Earth, including here in Washington, D.C., according to their charter. So when I was approached to meet the Emir of Qatar as part of a publicity campaign orchestrated by 2 Orthodox Jews who were going to be paid untold sums of money, I sat with my children and I said to them, do you remember those soldiers? Do you remember the soldier who looked like, I said this to him in jest at the time, as did his mother in the hospital, missing an eye. A soldier missing an eye. The bullet had been shot by a Hamas terrorist. It went in his eye, came out the back of his head. He survived, and he was about to be medevaced to a hospital in Germany to save his life. I said to my children, do you remember those soldiers? Because we're not going to allow Hamas, funded by Qatar, to get away with it. If Qatar wants a better image in the United States, then buying up vast liquefied oil fields in Texas is not the way. Stopping to kill people, including innocent Palestinians, that's the way. Stopping honor killings of innocent Palestinian girls, that's the way. Mahmoud Abbas has not visited Gaza in 10 years because he knows he would have the same fate as those Israeli soldiers. And all funded and financed by Qatar. To what end? For what purpose? What did Israel do to the Emir of Qatar? What did we do to you? And the bigger question, pro-Israel right-wing Jews accepting all expense-paid junkets to meet with the man who was financing rocket barrages of Israeli citizens? You can't make this stuff up. This, my friends, boggles the imagination. And I wrote column after column, and we took out ads with the New York Times, and I said, it's going to come out. People don't suddenly decide to visit Doha, Qatar. They have an incentive. Now, we all love money. We all need money. We have to pay our mortgages. We have to send our kids to schools. If you're in the Orthodox Jewish community, you got to sell a kidney to afford Jewish day school these days. I get it. But an Israeli leader once said to me, there's a special place in hell reserved for those who betray their people. The whitewash of Qatar's actions, funding of the Hamas terrorist organization, alliance with Iran, granting sanction and refuge to Hamas leaders, Ismail Haniyeh, so many others who've lived openly in Doha for the longest time. The whitewash which was done on the part of Jewish leaders, right-wing pro-Israel leaders, because these Qatari lobbyists, they did not go to the left-wing organizations because that wouldn't have given them the credibility they were seeking. They went to the pro-Israel right. That whitewash will live in infamy in the annals of the American Jewish community. It was an ignominious act that will live in infamy. Did I know at the time that I could be a target going so strongly against this? Of course I did. I was subject to libel, defamation, horrible articles written about me, and then suddenly stories in the New York Times and Bloomberg that Qatar is trying to hack me and my wife. What did my wife ever do to that? Mother of 9 children, grandmother of 5, thank God. I knew I could be a target, and maybe worse. God forbid. Maybe worse. But I thought of those soldiers with no arms and no legs who were 18. And they were called upon to protect this tiny little democracy called Israel. Tiny little bastion, a majestic bastion of human rights. In a region that often sees those rights violated. And I was going to protect Israel, America's foremost ally to the best of my ability, even if, God forbid, there were going to be consequences. But that any American citizen should have to fear speaking out against an American ally that hosts one of our largest air bases, that we have to fear personal destruction to silence us and compromise our First Amendment rights, is a disgrace. And the U.S. government has to protect its citizens. I'm not equipped to protect myself from the government of Qatar. I'm not equipped. I'm not going to, for reasons that I cannot now discuss, I'm not going to get into what we've discovered, what's happening. But I will tell you, there is no way that someone like me is equipped to take on a Middle Eastern government. But the United States government is equipped. There's all kinds of pressure that could be put on Qatar not to seek the destruction of American citizens who are critics. You see, this is a democracy. I could see the Capitol from here. We have to be able to speak out without fear. And this whole story of people being hacked or attacked for criticizing an ally of Iran is a shame. And action must be taken. My family lived in Iran for 2,000 years. My father was born in Isfahan. I want to love Iran, but not what the mullahs have done to it. I will not love a country that shoots a woman through the heart in what Time magazine called the most watched murder in the history of the world. I will not love a country that hangs a man in a square because of his sexual orientation, regardless of whether or not it's a sin to a religion. That's still no humane act. And I will not love a country, as President Trump said yesterday in an eloquent State of the Union address, that chants death to America and threatens my people with genocide. So how Qatar can be both an ally of Iran, an ally of the United States, and an ally of the United States is beyond me. Talk about playing both sides. And we Americans, we don't like to be played. My friends, in the final analysis, Islam and Judaism, two great world religions, emphasize the image of God that is imprinted and stamped on every human being. I truly believe there will be harmony between these two great religions. There was before, there's no excuse for there not to be now. But it will not come unless we see the spark of the divine in each and every one of our respective faiths. That means that Israel must at all times respect Islamic rights, Islamic dignity, the Islamic holy sites. I just came back from Israel yesterday morning. I took Dr. Mehmet Oz, arguably the most famous Muslim in America, or in maybe the world, who's not a head of state, proudly Islamic, world's most famous doctor. I took him to Israel. We visited the Islamic holy sites. And if Israel were to tread on those, we would be the first to speak out. But I'm asking all my Islamic brothers and sisters who are here today, when you see any nation or any group, Hamas, Iran, or Qatar funding either, supporting the annihilation, calling for the annihilation of your Jewish brothers and sisters, I'm begging you, please speak out. You would expect it from us. Please speak out. Do not watch the defilement of Islam, a great world religion. Don't let people call for a second Holocaust of the Jews in the name of Islam, because that's not Islam. Speak out. And that's why I agreed to attend today. An American ally cannot be allied with governments that call for the death to the United States, and especially the death to Israel and the Jewish people, or fund Hamas that actually is trying its best to implement that. And I'll just finally say, a few days ago, I drove by right where they found those three boys, the three teenage boys, who was murdered by Hamas that led to the 2014 war. Three teenage boys who were simply hitchhiking, murdered in the most grisly way. What do you expect Israel to do? Watch these boys die and do nothing? That would be immoral. In the final analysis, this is about morality and right and wrong. And as long as Qatar continues to fund Hamas, spew anti-Semitism through Al Jazeera, grant sanctuary and harbor to terrorist leaders, ally itself with Iran, then pressure must be put on this government to stop all those nefarious activities. God bless you and thank you.